Good afternoon. This is Daniel here with Cop Watch TV. Just want to welcome everyone into our live show. Real curious to see where everyone is watching from today. So if you want to go ahead and put that in the chat, and kind of while you're doing that, I'm real excited about this show, and I hope that you are too, because it's going to be a little bit different today. And one of the reasons why it's going to be different today is because I have an announcement that I want to make kind of before we get into some of the really important and interesting police cases. I retired yesterday. So yesterday was my last day with the Albuquerque Police Department. I started in 2005. And I was able to retire yesterday. I just want to say that it's, when it comes to being a retired police officer to being a police officer who's still on duty, there is some difference of what you can say. So things around here might change a little bit because I'm going to be a little bit more free to be able to give some of my opinions. Some of that, basically what I mean is that the essential rule is that, if a police officer is still working, they can't obviously say a whole lot while they're on duty, which I would never do. Also, what police officers can do is essentially anything that's of public interest. So yes, I was a police officer here in Albuquerque. If there was an officer involved shooting in Florida or New York, it's perfectly reasonable for me or any other police officer to talk about that shooting because it's of public interest. So that's kind of what I've been doing on the show and then on my other social media channels. So I just want to announce that I did retire yesterday from the Albuquerque Police Department. And, before we get into one of these cases, I'm going to tell you just a little bit about my career, what I did, just so you kind of have an idea of where I'm coming from when we talk about some of these cases. Because like all police officers, there's going to be some things that I'm not really an expert in, that I really didn't work in. So in my time with the Albuquerque Police Department, I did a little over 10 years on patrol, answering emergency calls for service. I did that on graveyard, swing, and day shift in pretty much every area of the city, from areas of the city on day shift when $1 million houses to areas of the city on graveyard that we called the war zone, and everything in between. I did spend over 4 years in the DWI unit, essentially going after drunk drivers. I did that for 4 years, which is probably the best. Almost anyone that you meet who's a retired police officer who worked some time in the DWI unit, they are going to think, or almost always going to say, that their best stories and really the best time of their career was in the DWI unit, going after drunk drivers. It's one of the most fun things that I did as a police officer. And then the last 4 years, I worked in Internal Affairs Force Division and in compliance. So basically, I was an investigator for use of force. When police officers were involved in a use of force, anything from an empty hand takedown to resisted handcuffing, all the way up to an officer-involved shooting, I was one of the investigators for that. After doing that for a couple years, I was transferred over to compliance, where basically not only was I looking at when it comes to how the police department can do better, not only was I looking at when it comes to Stacy, I retired yesterday. Yesterday was my last day. So not only was I, when I was doing in compliance, so not only was I looking at what the police officers on scene did, but I was also looking at, well, what did internal affairs do? And is there any gaps when it comes to policy, training, tactics? Are there any gaps in really looking at the police department, kind of like from a 360 bird's eye view? And that's what I've been doing the last couple of years. While I was working as a police officer, I went back for a master's degree in criminal justice and a law degree. So that's kind of my background, and then I've been doing social media content over at my channel, Police Law News, and then also here over on Cop Watch TV. I've been doing this show on Cop Watch TV for just about 2 years or so now. So if you don't follow us, please go ahead and make sure that you subscribe to this channel, because we do this show every single week. I was able to retire, after only working for about 18 and a half years. I'm curious if there's any other retired police officers in here, if you could put what state and how long you actually worked. Because working only 18 and a half years, my guess, just from talking to police officers around the country, is really on the lower end of when police officers can retire. I was lucky enough when I started in 2005 to be in the state of New Mexico, where the police retirement was only 20 years. I was able to buy a year, and then burn out sick and vacation. So I only had to work for about 18 and a half years. I know there are some states like Indiana, whereas, you have to work a certain amount of years, and then it becomes like a math problem. It's a certain amount of years, and then it's a certain amount of years, and then, and then you have to be a certain age, and then it's at that point that you can retire. But luckily, when I started, it was a 20-year retirement. Let's see. Kalina says, do you have a Chagrin Falls patch or a Bainbridge patch? No, I don't think that we do. But any patches that you want to send us, we will definitely add to our wall. And we're going to put instructions here in the chat here in a second for that. So, the reason why I'm kind of going through this is that, I did want to let everyone know that I just retired. And again, like there are some things in policing where I feel pretty comfortable on, when it comes to DUI, when it comes to drunk driving investigations. Again, that's all I did for about 4.5 years. I was an instructor. At the time that I was in the DWI unit, I was making more DWI arrests than anyone else in the state. I was doing between 300 and 400 a year. Also, I being with Internal Affairs Force Division investigating use of force. I feel pretty comfortable that I have a significant amount of knowledge when it comes to force. Now, if you want to talk about vehicle crash reconstruction or evidence collection or blood splatter, that stuff I'm not going to know anything about, okay? So that's the kind of stuff where, I would never claim to be an expert anyways, but that's not the kind of stuff that I would ever talk about with any kind of authority, because I have no idea about that kind of stuff. That just hasn't been my experience. I also never worked in a homicide unit or anything like that, so when it comes to more complex criminal investigations, I worked patrol, DWI, and then in internal affairs. So, when it comes to more complex felony investigations or evidence collection, crime scene investigation, that just isn't something that I ever did. But DWI, basic patrol tactics for over a decade, and then use of force, along with my law degree, I feel comfortable in talking about these types of issues. So the first case that we're going to get into, and it would be, just to be honest, it would be strange for me to retire from the Albuquerque Police Department literally the same day that a huge scandal, an alleged scandal, hit the Albuquerque Police Department without me talking about it. So I'm going to talk about this case first, even though it's a little bit uncomfortable for me to talk about. But, I retired yesterday, and just to put it out there, the way that retirement works, maybe not everywhere, but at least for me, is I didn't get to pick my retirement date. The way it works is you talk to Human Resources and you say, hey, I would like to retire. Human Resources goes through all of your paperwork. They see, this is how much sick time you have. Here's how much vacation time you have. Here's how many, holidays are coming up. And basically, Human Resources, several months in advance, gives you what your retirement date is. So the retirement date, it's not like I woke up yesterday and decided to retire. No, this is paperwork that was paperwork that was filled out months ago. And basically, Human Resources tells you when you're going to retire. What Human Resources told me is that, hey, if you don't take any time off, January 18th is going to be your retirement date. So that was my retirement date. Well, I handed in all my stuff, did everything like people do when they retire. And later on in the day, a pretty big news story hit the Albuquerque Police Department. And I just want to say there isn't a whole lot of information known, and I don't have any extra information about this. Really, all I know is what's on the news. But because this is probably going to be a pretty big national story, I felt that it would be strange for me to say I retired from Albuquerque Police and then not at least mention this. So basically, here's what we know so far: that the district attorney in Bernalillo County. So Bernalillo County is the county that the city of Albuquerque is in. The district attorney is a guy named Sam Bregman. I know Sam. I've known him for years. When I started off as an officer back in 2005, 2006, Sam was a defense attorney, and what I can say about him is he was one of the best, most competent, toughest defense attorneys out there. Sam is a guy that you wanted on your team. I can't say enough, one of the best attorneys in the state of New Mexico. And his son is Alex Bregman, who is the star baseball player for the Houston Astros. So that's Sam Bregman. He became our district attorney in Bernalillo County last year. Our district attorney was elected to Attorney General. So the DA's office was vacant, and Sam was appointed by the governor. So again, Sam is an incredible attorney, and he's done a great job as DA over the last year or so that he's been there. And basically what he came out with yesterday, the district attorney's office, is they said that there were 144 DWI cases that were essentially dismissed by the DA's office. And all they said is that essentially it was in reference to a federal investigation. And they said that, if you have any other questions about this federal investigation, well, go and ask the feds. So that's exactly what local media here in Albuquerque did. They went ahead and that's exactly what the local media did. They went ahead and, they asked the feds, hey, all these DWI cases were dismissed. They said it was in reference to a federal investigation. What can you guys tell us? And really all that the feds were able to say is that there was an investigation involving some Albuquerque Police Department officers. We don't know how many, but there is allegations of some type of kickback scheme with some Albuquerque police officers and some defense attorneys in Albuquerque. We don't have any information. We don't know who those officers are. Only that this story just hit yesterday. And let me read the statement by Tara M. Dewberry. She's the secretary to the U.S. Attorney. She said, "We can confirm federal law enforcement activity at the location in Albuquerque, done with the full cooperation of the Albuquerque Police Department." And they essentially declined to comment any further. The spokesman for the Albuquerque Police Department, Gil Gallegos, he released a statement just before 9 p.m. yesterday, where basically he said APD has been working with the FBI for the past several months on an investigation involving members of the department, and due to the sensitive nature of the investigation, some officers have been placed on administrative leave and others will be temporarily reassigned within the department. APD leadership is working closely with the FBI to ensure a complete and thorough investigation can be completed. So again, because I just worked for the, and again, it'll be interesting to see how closely APD has worked with the FBI, since many of the officers that are implicated in this, we're working with the DWI unit really as of last week and have pending cases in New Mexico. But again, Sam Bregman did say that 144 of them have been dismissed. So we will definitely keep an eye on that. Like I said, because I've been here with the Albuquerque Police Department for almost 2 decades, I probably know most of the people involved. And what I'm hoping is that it's not true, or it's a very minimal version of what has been alleged. And yeah, a question came up is, why did I retire? And essentially because I could. Again, we have a 20-year retirement here in New Mexico, and I'm 41 years old, and I was able to retire, and I felt that it was time to move on. Someone else asked what my plans are. Again, because I did go to law school. I'm going to get licensed here and work as an attorney, either here or in Colorado, here in the next 6 months or so. That's my plan. Also do more social media content, write more on Substack, and be here on this show for you all every Friday. Those are pretty much my plans. All right, so the next case that we're going to talk about, thankfully doesn't involve the Albuquerque Police Department, but it is kind of a weird, corrupt scandal kind of a thing in New York. And this is a case where, a lot of times we get comments, or I get messages on Twitter or TikTok or Instagram, some of the other channels that I do content on, and people like to bash police unions. And, I think it's only fair to say that, my only experience with police unions is the police union here in New Mexico that I've been a part of. And I should say that not only have I been a part of a police union, but I've been a rep for the police union for about 6 years, representing officers in discipline matters. I was an elected rep as a union rep for about 6 years. And so the only experience that I have with the police union is here. And I hear about these stories all around and stuff like that. And, if this case that I'm going to get into here in a minute, if it's true, and it seems like it is, yeah, I get why some people have some issues with police unions or think that police unions have too much power. What I could say here in New Mexico is that police unions don't have enough power. No one really cares what police unions think. There's been a time, so let me just put it out there. So when people say that police unions have too much power, I kind of laugh at that. And again, just from my personal experience, and here's why. Back in and around 2008, 2010, sometime around then, I don't know the exact year, our police union had a contract with the city where we were we gave some things up as a police union in exchange for some pay raises that we were supposed to have. Essentially, those pay raises were supposed to take effect in like a 3-year thing. Like this year, the officers will get this much much and this much and that much. And that was a contract. So again, the union gave some stuff up in exchange for, it was an agreement with the city. Well, that was around the time that the economy went to shit. I don't know if it was 2009, 2008, 2010, sometime around then. And basically when it came time to get those different raises, the city of Albuquerque basically said, sorry, we're not going to pay you, sue us. And that's exactly what we had to do. So here, again, when people say the police unions have too much power, we couldn't even hold the city to enforce a contract that they signed. And we did. It took about 5 years. The police union had to sue the city. And the money that we were supposed to get, we never ended up getting it. We ended up settling in court years later for about 10% of what we were owed. So that, again, that's my experience with, how powerful police unions are. And I'm going to say, I acknowledge that isn't the case around the country. Case in point being this case in New York City when it comes to courtesy cards. Now, the idea of courtesy cards, to me, it's really strange because we don't have that here in New Mexico. Again, being a police officer for almost 2 decades, I have never once seen a courtesy card or anything like that. As being a member of a police union, this just isn't something that we do, but apparently, this isn't the case, and I know this is an East Coast thing. So when I tell you this, it almost seems like it's a script from a 1980s Sylvester Stallone movie. It's really strange. So basically, it has to do with courtesy cards. Now, apparently, what these courtesy cards are essentially the police unions in New York City. Here's what the allegations are: is that there's 5 different police unions in New York City who represent sergeants and officers and detectives and stuff like that, and then they hand out these cards. They're essentially these laminated cards, and it doesn't have any instructions on them, but each officer gets 5 of them, and they hand them out to family and friends. And the idea behind it is that if you get stopped and you have one of these cards, you show the card to the officer, and that officer is supposed to give you a break, to not write you a ticket or anything like that. And and to me, so I'm just gonna say it, that seems like a bad idea. That seems strange. That seems foreign. In 20 years of being a cop, I've never seen anything in real life. Again, I live in New Mexico. This happens in New York City. So again, it's far away. And I think this is kind of an East Coast thing, because even in a lot of the conferences that I've been to around the country and with talking with police officers, it seems like only police officers in the East Coast, have ever seen this kind of thing in person. Well, there is a police officer. His name is Matthew Bianchi. He's with NYPD. And, essentially he said, no, this is bullshit, that everyone should be treated equally under the law. And you know what? That's a principle that I agree with. Everybody should be treated equally under the law. Everybody should be treated equally under the law. And, he was basically writing tickets to individuals who had these cards. Well, what Matthew Bianchi, with Officer Bianchi, is saying is that essentially he was retaliated for this. So not only were members of the union, this is his allegations. He filed the lawsuit. So here's what his allegations are. He says that because of this happened, that, he was basically not only threatened by the union, basically the union officials saying to him, hey, we're the ones who protect you if you get in trouble. So you may want to honor these cards. He also alleges that command staff, that his direct supervisors, were saying, hey, you need to honor these cards. You need to play along with this part of the brotherhood. Otherwise we're going to move you from your traffic unit. We're going to put you on nights and all these kinds of things. So, he filed a civil lawsuit against multiple members of the New York City Police Department and against the police union, alleging all of these things. So it'll be really interesting to see what happens. And like I said, this is a terrible idea. It's a bad idea. And that's why I think it's good to see different perspectives. So when I sit here and I say that police unions really don't have a whole lot of power, they're important, but they really don't have a whole lot of power. That's my experience. And then I hear someone else from New York City maybe say, no, police unions have a lot of power. They actually have too much power. Here's an example of it. I get it. Not every single police department or every culture in every police department or union is exactly the same. So this seems like it's going on. It seems like it's an East Coast thing. And again, this principle of these courtesy cards, this is something that should have been left in the 1980s. It's really strange. It's got no place in policing. The idea of equal protection under the law, that is something that is incredibly important, and especially now with body cameras. So what are these officers doing? Are they going up to make traffic stops, and then when someone shows them a card? Are they stopping the body camera? Like, can we get footage of this stuff? I mean, the whole thing seems really strange. So I'm really curious to see what some of your thoughts about that are. Let's see. We got Kalina's Agility says, I've seen a lot of videos of people trying to pull the "my brother, my father's a police officer" statement when they're pulled over for being drunk. I don't like the idea of courtesy cards. Yeah, no, I've seen that too. Absolutely. Steve Ladder says, what percentage of the city budget is being used for police? I have no idea, Steve. I don't know the answer to that. But my guess is a Google search of the city of Albuquerque, and that question would probably get you the answer. Though that isn't. I don't work in the budget office, so I do not know that off the top of my head. Though the majority of police departments spend the majority of cities spend their money on public safety and fire. So but my guess is it's probably a pretty big percentage, but I don't know off the top of my head. My guess is it's in line with other cities. So that's the idea of these courtesy cards. It's a real strange thing, and this is a lawsuit that I'm going to be filing. I think it's also that Officer Bianchi, I think that he should be commended. Basically what he said is that he made a complaint, and again, this is his allegation, not saying it's true. This is what he's alleging in his lawsuit. He's alleging that he went to Internal Affairs and filed the complaint, and that essentially that they never followed up with him. Internal Affairs, the New York City Police Department, did respond and said that isn't true. So again, hopefully we get some of these facts out here, because what we all want is for people to be treated equally under the law, and a lot of we just want to know what happened, and we want this kind of stuff to stop. It's absolutely silly. Let's see. Deborah says courtesy cards are ridiculous. I saw a video where a smashed woman slurred about having a gold card. She was referring to the courtesy card. Yeah, courtesy cards are absolutely ridiculous, and this is one of the reasons, Deborah, why I love body cams. Not just because. I'm here on, really the best body cam channel out there, but I think it's important for transparency. We need to see what happens if anybody has any video, or anybody knows of any body cam video of someone trying to give a police officer a courtesy card. Definitely send us a message with that, so we can look into that, because that's the body camera footage that we like to put up here. All right, so I'm going to talk about this an officer-involved shooting in Idaho, and this is a really interesting officer-involved shooting case, and it's got a pretty good lesson for it here at the end. And then definitely anything that I've done said today, why don't you go ahead and put questions here in the comments section. We'll go ahead and get to those as I'm going through this. So this is a case that actually happened about a year ago. The reason that we're talking about it now is because the body camera footage just came out on this case. So this happened in Boise, Idaho. We don't have a whole lot of cases from Boise, Idaho, but this is one of them. So we have this case in Boise, Idaho. So here's what happened. So police officers were dispatched to a call of an individual. Ends up being a guy named Henry Andrews, and he was walking in the middle of the highway. That was the call. That was the call that police got, that hey, there's a guy walking in the middle of the highway. Now again, let's criticize police officers when they make mistakes, but let's not when they do what they're supposed to do. So a police officer is dispatched to that call, and that's a reasonable thing. A police officer has to go to that call. Now at the time you might be thinking, well, that isn't a real serious thing, and you know what, when it comes to like what kind of crime it is, it probably isn't. So walking in the middle of the highway is probably a misdemeanor crime. In New Mexico it would be like obstructing traffic or something like that, which is a pretty low level misdemeanor. But just because it's a misdemeanor crime doesn't mean it's not dangerous. So if someone is walking in the middle of the road, obviously that could be a life or death situation for the person who's walking in the highway. Also, what if someone stops and tries to help him? Could be dangerous for them. Also, other vehicles. You can imagine a situation where a normal person is driving down the road and all of a sudden there's a dude walking in the middle of the highway. Maybe that car swerves and they cause another crash, or they involved in a fatal crash trying to avoid him. So even though it's a misdemeanor crime, it's actually something that could be really dangerous. So police officers responding pretty quickly to something like this kind of call, that's probably what's going to happen. But as you see on this channel, a lot of other channels, when police officers get a call, by the time they get there a few minutes later, a lot of times the information they get from the caller isn't the same. So a case like this, maybe the time the officer gets there, the individual has walked off the highway, they're a block away, but that's not what happened here. So police officers get this call of Mr. Andrews walking in the middle of the highway. A sergeant responds, and that's exactly what he sees. He sees a dude walking walking in the middle of the highway, ends up being Mr. Andrews. So the sergeant does what he's supposed to do. He stops his vehicle behind Mr. Andrews. Pretty much as soon as he stops behind Mr. Andrews, by this time Mr. Andrews wasn't in the middle of the highway. He was basically in the right lane. And as soon as the police officer came on scene with his lights on, Mr. Andrews did walk to the shoulder and did get out of traffic. So the officer steps out of his vehicle and he starts to talk to Mr. Andrews, from his car. It's at that point that he sees that Mr. Andrews is holding a giant knife in his hand. So he's holding this big knife in his hand, and this is the first time that the sergeant realizes, hey, this guy's holding a knife. And Mr. Andrews starts to walk towards the police officer. Immediately, the officer does, what he's supposed to do. He yells, stop. He yells, drop the knife. And Mr. Andrews keeps walking towards the police officer. The officer then goes from, giving commands of what to do, and he gives a force warning. Now, a force warning is really what we want police officers to do. It's not always feasible to do, but when police officers can, they should. Here's what that means. It's not just giving commands like, drop the knife, drop the gun, get on the ground. Yeah, officers should do that too, but a force warning is basically giving people a little bit more information saying, hey, if you don't do this, here's the consequence of that. Again, it's not always feasible to do, but the sergeant did it in this case. The sergeant said, drop the knife or I'll shoot you. That's pretty specific, right? I mean, if you weren't sure what the police officer was telling you to do, that should make you sure. So the officer says, drop the knife or I'm going to shoot you. Instead of following those commands, Mr. Andrews decided he was going to keep walking towards the police officer. The sergeant gave 2 different force warnings. The second warning of drop the knife or I'll shoot you, he only let Mr. Andrews take about 2 more steps, and he did fire his weapon at Mr. Andrews. One of the rounds fired, so Mr. Andrews was injured. I believe he was shot in the leg. He was injured. The reason why I wanted to cover this case is that, Mr. Andrews did not die. He didn't die. And, pretty much after he was shot, officers were able to run up to him, kick the knife away. They were able to render aid and basically save his life, save his leg. He was injured. The story does have a happy ending in that, a quick review, not a quick review, about a year review of this case from the district attorney's office basically said that the police officer followed the law and that the shooting was legal, that there aren't going to be any charges against the police officer, essentially that the police officer was courageous and followed the law. On the other side of that, Mr. Andrews was sentenced to 25 years in prison for aggravated assault with a deadly weapon against the police officer. So, I'm not saying everyone should be a cop in Idaho, but listen, if you're thinking, should I be a cop in Minneapolis or in Boise? Pick Boise, okay? Because again, this is a case where this is obviously a reasonable, lawful, and justified officer-involved shooting, so we shouldn't be surprised when that's what happens. When the DA says that the cop did everything right and was courageous and didn't violate any laws, and the bad guy is put in jail for over 2 decades. Again, that should be the norm when stuff like this happens, but unfortunately it's not, but it did end that way in this case. And the other thing that I want to say, and this is where the important lesson comes in, is that, really what happened in this case is, as the officers, right after the shooting, as the officers are rendering aid. And the reason I'm going to say this part is because there's a lot of people who are going to say is, how did the officer know that he was going to attack him with a knife? And maybe he couldn't hear him. Maybe, maybe he should have tried to use a taser first, or you can't, all these ridiculous things that, people say when they have the luxury and the privilege of never, being on the other end of someone trying to stab you with a knife, is that as the officers were rendering aid and basically saving Mr. Andrews' life, and this is on body camera video, Mr. Andrews said, "I wanted to kill you." The sergeant who was rendering aid and getting a tourniquet on his leg, he was almost in disbelief, thinking like, I'm trying to save this guy's life. What did he just say? So he asked him to repeat himself, and a second time, Mr. Andrews says, "I wanted to kill you." And that's where the lesson comes. If you're a police officer out there, never second guess a deadly threat. Never second guess a deadly threat, because you may not get a second chance. Because all these people who are going to say that the officer, this wasn't a deadly force situation, that the police officer shouldn't have fired, that they should have used a taser, all of these different things, when it comes down to it, the police officer knew. He knew this guy with a knife who was advancing towards him and not following instructions, he knew what the intent was. The intent was to use that knife to kill the police officer, and that's exactly what Mr. Andrews said that his intention was going to do. He said, "I wanted to kill you." It's a good thing the officer utilized deadly force and not a taser or any other kind of less lethal weapons. When I talked about this on Twitter, I believe someone asked the question, sometimes people ask really good questions. A lot of times people people ask really good questions. And, someone phrase that something to the effect of, hey, like, I'm a supporter of law enforcement, but can you tell me why the officer didn't use a taser? And my response was, hey, that's such a great question. I'm really happy to answer that question. Here's the reason why the officer didn't use a taser and shouldn't use a taser is because tasers fail approximately 40% of the time. And when I say they fail 40% of the time, that's not the most accurate way to say it. Essentially, tasers don't have the desired outcome 40% of the time. And it's usually not because of the taser device. It's usually because the person is wearing a jacket, they have too many clothes on, or in order for a taser deployment, to basically have effect to where, someone is incapacitated for 5 seconds, basically a taser shoots out 2 different prongs. Both of the prongs have to hit the individual, okay? So, it's basically like shooting a gun where 2 bullets come out and they both have to hit. Now, if the taser prongs land too close together, that's called not having enough spread. Please, if there's another taser instructor in here, correct me if I said that wrong, but essentially the more spread you have, the more it's going to work. So if you hit someone with a taser kind of in the belly and then in the thigh, with each prong, that's a pretty good spread. As long as they're not wearing like a heavy jacket or something, it's probably going to work. Also, again, imagine trying to hit a moving target under stress with essentially a weapon system that fires out 2 things. Again, so it's usually not the taser device. It's usually the clothing someone's wearing, because it's hard to hit a moving target. All of these things where 40% of the time, tasers don't have the desired effect. So what that means, if someone is bearing down on you with a knife and you shoot them with a taser and the taser doesn't work, there's a 40% chance that person is probably going to be able to stab you in the neck and kill you. So again, now most police officers aren't going to take that, 40% chance that they're going to be stabbed to death if the taser doesn't work. That's if there's a single officer. Now let's say there's 2 or 3 cops. Yeah, okay, if there's 2 or 3 police, let's say there's only 2. If there's 2 police officers on this Boise, Idaho call, here's what I would say is what police departments should train police officers to do. One police officer should keep his or her gun out, and should stay lethal force. The other police officer should attempt to use some type of less than lethal force. They should have a force array. They should have maybe a beanbag shotgun, maybe a 40 millimeter, or a taser. Yes, absolutely, that is 100% correct. Also, ideally, it would be great if there was a crisis intervention officer there too. If I could think of like my dream team, like my fucking 1992 NBA dream team of what I want, what I want is 4 police officers there. I want 2 police officers there who have lethal force out, 1 police officer who has less than lethal, and then another police officer who's also armed with less than lethal, but their main job is to do crisis intervention for the person. So that's what I would want. Now, obviously, in a case like this, you cannot dispatch 4 different police officers for every single call. A call where a guy is walking in the middle of the street, a call where a guy is walking in the middle of the street, you can't send 4 cops to all those things. I mean, just like Steve said, if you want 90% of your city budget to be cops, then maybe, but the sergeant happened to be alone. This is the kind of call that only a single officer goes to. And again, the officer didn't have any time. The sergeant, he was bearing down him with a knife. So that's what I want to say is never second guess a deadly threat. Steve says taser have put lots of people in boxes and medical examiners have covered it up. I'm going to go ahead and disagree with you there, Steve. But if you have any research, link it. Here's why. And here's why I'm going to say this, Steve, is because tasers have been around probably since about 2000, early 2000s or so. When I was finishing up my undergraduate degree in 2005, we were talking about tasers. So I know they were from before 2005, and I probably around 2000. I could be off by a year or two, but that's my guess is when tasers became popular in policing. Now, in the policing, and I've said this a bunch of times, but in the police academy, I was tased with every other cadet in my academy. I was tased 2 different times in the police academy. My point by saying that is, if tasers were killing people left and right, police departments would not do it to their cadets if it was something that was going to kill them. There were 4, I think my police cadet class probably had, 26 people. We graduated. My police department, Albuquerque Police Department, I think we hire, somewhere around 100 people a year, give or take. Every single one of those individuals, are tased twice. So let's just take that. Let's say my police department, let's just take my police department, Albuquerque Police, as an example. And let's put that against what Steve has said. Let's just use common sense here. So I've been on the police department for just about 19 years. Okay, 19 years, 100 people a year. So that's 1,900 different tasings of police officers. But everybody is tased twice. So now we're at about 3,800 tasings. So my police department had 3,800 tasings of police officers in the last 19 years, and no one has been injured or died. Also, compare that to the thousands of times that tasers have been used by Albuquerque police, and I think only a couple of people have died. Now, here's when tasers can kill you. So, if you are someone who has heart problems, let's say you're 88 years old and you have heart problems, yes, could that have some kind of effect? Sure. Now, how many 88-year-olds are tased by police officers? Not a whole lot, right? Also, if you're high as shit on drugs, there's stimulants, cocaine, meth, if your heart is all amped up on a shit ton of cocaine and then you're tased, yes, we have seen different cases where that can have a negative effect. It's pretty rare, but then again, in a situation like that, as a police officer is talking to someone and they tase them, a police officer can't say, hey, sir, you're going fucking ape shit over there. Would you mind telling us everything you've taken for the last 24 hours so we know if it's safe to tase you? No, usually a taser is utilized so a firearm doesn't have to be. So yes, are tasers perfect? No. Are batons perfect? No. Is OC or mace or 40 millimeters or beanbag shotguns, are they perfect weapon systems? No. But in general, is it better to tase someone a little bit early so you don't wait 5, 10, 15 seconds and you have to shoot them? Of course, because the vast majority of the time, 99.99% of the time, a taser is not going to kill you. Again, if a taser was going to kill people, then they wouldn't do it to police cadets in the academy. That's my point, and that's just using some common sense. You're better than that, Steve. And Cajun Randy says, no 88-year-old should be tased by a cop. I agree, Cajun Randy. I don't like to say things in absolutes, but absence and 88-year-old being armed with a gun or something like that. There aren't a whole lot of 88-year-olds that are going to be tased by police, and they probably shouldn't be tased by police. All right, let's see, one more from Steve. Tasers were turned down in the early 2000s after a medical examiner was tased to death in Cameron, Louisiana. That's possible. Again, I'm just saying, I've been a police officer, Steve, since 2005. That's what I can talk about. If you're going to sit here and tell me that there were problems with tasers in 2001 and Taser fixed it and they're much better now, I'm going to believe you because it seems like technology always gets better. But tasers are pretty safe. Again, when I was in the police academy, I was never hit with a baton. They never shot me with a beanbag shotgun. They never shot me with a 40 millimeter because even though those are less lethal, those could cause some serious damage. Tasers pretty much don't. It's uncomfortable for about 5 seconds, and then you're totally fine. Again, for the 9th time. They would not do it to police officers in the police academy if they thought it was gonna cause them to drop dead, right? That's just common sense. All right, so that's the last topic that I was going to talk about today. I hope that everybody has a great weekend. And again, if you haven't already, please go ahead and subscribe to the channel, share it with friends and family. We'll be doing this here every Friday. One of the things that we like to do is I do check the chat as we go along. And if you see any other interesting use of force cases or DWI cases or any other really, topics in policing that you think are interesting that you want us to cover here on this show, definitely put it in the chat. It is something that I follow throughout the week. So again, my name is Daniel. You can follow me over at Police Law News. And I hope that you all have a great weekend. Stay safe. Thank you.